Hey everybody, Ryan here at eTrailer. Today on our 2011 GMC Sierra 1500, we're going to be showing you how to install the SumoSprings suspension enhancement for the rear axle. But before we do that, why don't we check them out and make sure that these are going to be something that'll work for your truck. So before we get our suspension enhancement installed, what we like to do is just take a couple of measurements and do a couple of tests. That way we can really, have something to work with in terms of how well our suspension enhancement works. So what we're gonna do now is just take a baseline measurement. So we have our truck with the factory suspension, no weight in the bed of our truck. And what I'm gonna do is measure from the ground to the bottom edge of our wheel well. And with it like this, it's going to be setting right at 37.5 inches. We're also going to take that same measurement here at the front, and from the ground to that bottom edge, that's going to be right at 35.5 inches. So with that said, what we're going to do now is put some weight in the bed of the truck and see what happens. So went ahead, got some weight in the truck, and just visually you can tell definitely affected it. Definitely got some squatting going on. So we'll take that measurement again here at the back from the ground to the edge. It's going to be right at 34.25 of an inch. It's going to be right at 36 inches. So what's happening? Back of the truck squatting, front of the truck's getting raised up a little bit, and it's really going to affect quite a few things. I'm sure a lot of you have felt this before. You know, what's happening, especially in the back, is your suspension is working really hard, more or less, to try to maintain things, and so you're going to lose a lot of that travel. If you do this a lot, you can prematurely wear out those suspension components. Here in the front, your drivability is going to be affected in terms of steering, in terms of braking. You know, it can start to kind of wear your tires funny because the suspension is no longer in the correct alignment, and so really just your overall performance is going to be affected. So hopefully, putting a suspension enhancement on here is really going to help correct those issues. With that said, though, talking about it and taking some measurements are one thing. What really matters is how it's going to feel whenever you're driving it. So why don't we go ahead, hop in the truck, we'll run through our test course and see how it does. So here in the truck, just sitting in it, I can feel it, front's raised up a little bit. Definitely not the preferred method of driving, at least for me. I'd assume for a lot of you guys as well. But what we're going to do here first is hit some bumps. And what I like to do is hit a few of them and really try to get some, some of that shock and stuff going through our chassis, going through our suspension. And over the first few, it kind of is what it is. It definitely feels like it's struggling a little bit. It really sloppy, I guess is the best way that I can put it. You feel that bump and it's hard. That suspension doesn't have much travel going on with it. The front end, you go over the bumps and it just feels kind of loose. I feel like there's definitely some room for improvement here. It's sloppy. That's the best way I can put it. You hit the bump and we're kind of floating around and stuff. So hopefully the suspension enhancement will improve this. And, granted, with that said too, even though this is a half-ton truck, these are still pretty capable machines. And this isn't a ton of weight. I feel like this could definitely handle some more. So, imagine if we had double the weight or had a super heavy trailer, those effects are definitely going to be amplified. So what we're going to do now is some evasive maneuvering here, and this is where I usually see a lot of change. And honestly, I feel like this is most real world. How often are you going to hit 20 bumps in a row? But that said, yeah, it's pretty bad. I'm not even really going that fast. And when I start cutting this wheel, we're getting a lot of body roll. And, you know, it really takes a lot to kind of correct everything. And like I said, I'm not going but 8-9 mile an hour. So, you know, definitely some room for improvement there. And like I said in the past with my experience, I feel like this is where these enhancements, generally speaking, suspension enhancements of all kinds, really shine. So, you know, it feels loose, and everything can be tightened up a little bit. I feel like it'd make a big difference. So we'll see what happens. So now with our suspension enhancement installed, go ahead and get this tank back in. That way we can see what the deal is. See if we gain those performance benefits while we're back out on our test course. So now that we have our SumoSprings installed, put that same amount of weight in the bed of the truck, and just visually speaking, it looks a lot better. So we'll figure out exactly how much. So from the ground to that bottom edge, that's actually 36 3/4 of an inch. So compared to the factory ride height with no weight, and only is squatting down about 3/4 of an inch actually. So pretty impressive. That made a pretty big difference. With the rear done though, let's go ahead and check out the front and see what the deal is up there. From the ground to that bottom edge, let's see, it is right over 35.5. So if I had to give an exact measurement, it'd be 35 5/8. So it's lifting the front of the truck up just barely. So pretty big improvement there in terms of measurements and how the truck's just sitting at rest. But just like what I said before, measurements are one thing, how it's actually going to perform is a whole different story. So let's go ahead and hop in and take it for a spin. Here in the truck, go ahead and throw it in drive, and I can feel a difference already in terms of, you know, how it was squatting before. Truck feels a lot more level, so definitely a little more of a comfortable ride in terms of that. But I'm going to try to replicate what we did before to the best of my ability. So we're hitting these bumps again, and just like before, I'll let that energy kind of transfer through our truck, and way better, way better. Believe it or not, how can I explain this here? The truck feels like how you'd expect it to. You know, the suspension before, it was just kind of dropping down and was super sloppy. It's not nearly as bad as what it was. It actually feels like you have some shock there. You know what I mean? Before, it almost just felt like the shock was just flopping around. It actually kind of takes that bump and recovers the way it should actually. Same thing in the front too, actually. At first, it was super sloppy. The wheel almost felt light, and that's not the case at all. And I'm actually surprised how well these are doing over these bumps. I know in the past with other vehicles and putting these on, you could tell a little bit of a difference, but I mean, it wasn't out of this world. And this one's actually making a pretty big difference there. So I'm happy to be able to say that. So if it's doing that good over the bumps, really curious to see how it'll improve during our slalom course here. So we'll shoot up the road a little bit and run through that next. So we made it down the street a little ways, and we've got this clearing actually today. It's usually jam-packed in here, but we got a little bit of space now, so I'm gonna pick up some speed and start to do our maneuvering. Way better, way better. The truck actually feels planted, way less body roll. I mean, there's still a little bit there, but you know, I'm actually gaining speed too. I'm doing about 14, 15 miles an hour. I feel like I could go faster than that if I wanted to, where beforehand I could barely make it to 10, and you know, the truck was all over the place. So definitely an improvement. Definitely an improvement. So, you know, this is one of them things where the truck just feels better. It's going to instill a little more confidence in your driving abilities too. You know, I mean, unless you pull a trailer every single day, all day, or been doing it for a long time, a lot of people, it kind of makes, you know, it's a whole nother element to driving, kind of makes you a little more cautious, a little more nervous, a little more white knuckles sometimes. So if something like this can you know, make you a little more confident as a driver when you're pulling a trailer, that alone would be something that's worth it to me. So now that you know, we ran our truck through the test course and seen how these actually performed, let's take a look at them actually installed on the truck. So this is what they're going to look like, and really simple design. Essentially, they're just going to fill that void in between the bottom of your frame and the top of your axle housing, and that's how they're going to provide the support. So whenever you put weight on the back of your truck, whether it be pulling a trailer or actually having something in the bed, you know, the suspension is going to compress. These are going to make contact and provide that support, as opposed to your factory jounce bumper, which is this here. This isn't going to do any of that. Essentially, these aren't designed to provide any additional support or anything like that. These are just there to prevent your truck from bottoming out, more or less. So very, very simple design and very effective. When it comes to picking out a suspension enhancement, you know, there's a ton of different options available out there, and you know, they all have their pros and cons. So one of the pros about a SumoSpring like this is the fact that you're really not going to have to maintenance it or anything along those lines. You know, you put it on there and you're done. You don't have nothing to worry about. Now, one of the cons is you don't have a ton of adjustability. There is some, and it's kind of auto-adjusting, I guess you could call it. So these are, I guess you could call them progressive. So more or less what that means is the more weight you put on the back of your truck, the stiffer these are going to become. So let's say if you had a pretty light load in the bed or pulling a light trailer, just enough to make your truck kind of squat down a little bit, you know, it's going to provide you with that, with X amount of support. On the other hand, let's say if you have a real heavy load and it's coming down, you know, it's squatting down pretty good, these are essentially going to more or less get stiffer the further down that the truck comes, and provide you with more support. So, you know, pretty nice there. One of the things that is pretty nice about these is the fact that your ride really isn't going to be affected whenever you're not towing a trailer or you know, have a load in the bed. And that's because they're not really doing anything right now. Some people do say that when they hit a big bump or something, since these are pretty close, it kind of jostles them a little bit more. But in the grand scheme of things, I mean, if you're hitting a bump that big or a pothole that big anyway, you're getting kind of tossed around regardless, right? So, I mean, is it a huge deal? To me, it wouldn't be, but to some, I guess it is. And, you know, one of the things about these, there's a few different types of SumoSprings that you can use that will best, you know, provide you with the best solution for what you're trying to do. So these ones are rated for 2,800 pounds of leveling support. So that's what they can handle. That isn't going to increase your truck's load carrying capacity, so keep that in mind. If you don't need that much support, there's also a couple different other ones available. So you have these and these. The black ones are 1,500 pounds. I believe the blue ones are 1,000. So soft. You know, these are the softest, kind of got your medium, and then the most heavy duty, or, you know, the higher end of this type for sure. So, you know, you can use what's best set up for your situation. One of the things with these, I always like to recommend these for those of you that have an in-bed camper. And I say that because these are a little more forgiving. I feel like they just provide you with a little more of a smooth ride, as opposed to like an airbag, or let's say like a Timberin, for example. It's a similar design to this, but those are a lot more heavy duty, generally speaking, and really firm up the ride. Now, if you're someone that has a super heavy trailer that you're pulling all the time, that might be a better option for you. So for these, I feel like these are kind of just for the everyday, truck driver. Does some occasional towing, not really towing nothing crazy, super heavy or anything like that. Kind of just general purpose type stuff. I feel like this is where these really shine, because you don't lose a ton of your, comfort whenever the truck's unloaded, but you gain some comfort whenever it is loaded. And I kind of talked about airbags a little bit, so let me grab one here, because these definitely have their own place too. So this is an airbag, and the way this is going to work, it's going to go in between here, but generally speaking, you have some brackets that mount to your frame and to the axle housing, and that's how these get bolted up. Now with an airbag, you have a ton of adjustability. So generally speaking, most airbags are in between 5 and 100 psi. You can get some big dog airbags. I think they go up to like 150. But generally speaking, you're going to find yourself using that 40, 60 psi range for most things. And that's one of the pros with this. You have maximum adjustability. So if you're someone that's towing a lot of different trailers, if you have a work truck and the load's constantly changing, might be something worth looking into. The downside is the fact that you're going to have some maintenance that comes along with these. So these usually require a minimum of 5 psi. If you don't stay on top of that and you lose the pressure in it, you're going to break the bag. You're going to damage your bag. So, that's kind of one of the cons to it. And it uses airlines. So you route your airlines, and it kind of just is what it is. Sooner or later, it's going to leak. Whether it be a day from now or a few years from now, sooner or later, chances are pretty good you're going to run into a couple issues there. Not the case with these, or like the Timberins. They're just there. There's nothing really to them. So it's really just going to depend on your particular situation and what you're trying to do with your truck. That's really going to help determine what suspension enhancement is going to be best for you. So you do want to make sure, really regardless of what suspension enhancement you get, you want to make sure that it's going to fit your truck. These work with a lot of different trucks. And so you want to make sure to use our fit guide, check your year, make, model, and that'll really get you going in the right direction. Even pay attention to the small things too, if your truck's 2-wheel drive, 4-wheel drive, and so on, because that can make a difference in some scenarios. With that said, one of the big questions that we get asked a lot too is if you're going to be able to use a 5th wheel or a gooseneck hitch. With these, I do not see why you couldn't. Essentially, since they replaced that factory Johns bumper, they're not really in the way of anything. Don't know how many of you are going to be using those type of hitches for a half-ton, but if you are, I don't really see why you wouldn't be able to use these. And I also want to mention too, it's really popular to put lift kits on these trucks, bigger tires, kind of make them look cool. And if you use a lift kit that increases the distance here between the bottom of your frame and the top of your axle housing, you may need to look into a spacer. So it'll kind of help fill that void a little bit better, because if the bottom of your SumoSpring is way up here because you got your truck so jacked up, it's not going to do anything, you know what I mean? Until you put a ton of weight back here, it'll finally make contact. So to give you that support that you need, you may have to use one of those spacers. And just kind of to give you something here to kind of work off of, the top of the yellow portion of the spring to the bottom, that's going to be about 5 inches. So if you can do something with that number, great. If you can't, you can't. But other than that, at the end of the day, like I said, these are kind of that great general purpose, all-around suspension enhancement. They work really well. You don't feel like you're getting beat up whenever you're going down the road. And so something, at least in my opinion, that's definitely worth it, or definitely worth thinking about at least. As far as the installation goes, really not bad at all. You remove one bolt, take out your factory John's bumper, essentially kind of just bolt these up. They really shouldn't take you a whole lot of time. I mean, this is something you can do after work, or you know, a couple hours on your day off, and you'll be in pretty good shape. But if you'd like to see how that's done, feel free to hang around. We'll go ahead and get these installed together now. To begin our installation, we're going to be here at the back of our truck, and first thing you need to do is get it jacked up. So for a lot of you at home, I'm sure you're not going to have a drive-on lift like this, but you could just use your jack and your jack stands, and what you want to do is jack it up by the frame of your truck. That way your wheels will be hanging, because what we're looking to do is increase the distance in between our axle tube and our frame rail. And I say that because we're going to be working right here to get our factory John's bumper out and our spring installed. So for me, since I'm on a drive-on lift, I just used a pull jack here, and I'm able to kind of push up on our frame, and that's going to increase that distance. But with that said, now we can get our John's bumper removed. This is our John's bumper, and there's a hole in the middle of it and a 10mm bolt. So you take your 10mm socket, and I'm using this extension. Seems like it's about spot on. What we're going to do is break this loose. So there's the bolt that was holding it in. And we just grab our John's bumper and pull it out. Repeat the same thing on the other side. And matter of fact, from this point on, anything we do to this side, we're also going to do to the other side of our truck, because it'll be set up the same way. Take this plate. If yours is attached to the SumoSpring right out of the box, use this unthread. You're going to take this here bolt, put that through like so, and then you're going to take this stack of washers. I think I'm using 2, let's see how many I'm using here. 2, 4, 6, I have 7 of them, and the reason for that is to kind of fill this gap in here. So you're going to take those, put them over it, take some of the blue Loctite, put a little bit on the threads there, and then you can thread this in. And when you're threading this in, you want this stud to face towards the back of the truck, and we can tighten it down using a 6mm Allen key. I'll try to get it put straight like that. Just make sure it's tight. With our bracket up there now, we could take our SumoSpring, and there's some threads in there. You're going to take your blue Loctite and put some in the threads. You can also put it on the stud too if you wanted, but either way works. And then this is simply just going to thread right on. And thread it on until it's tight. And that'll finish up our look at and our installation of the SumoSpring suspension enhancement for the rear axle on our 2011 GMC Sierra 1500.